And he was in a mood at that time. He says, I don't want to do any more violent pictures. I'm tired of it. I've been involved with a lot of them. He says,
Clint Eastwood finally breaks his silence, revealing a secret that has haunted him for decades, one tied to his old friend and greatest rival, Gene Hackman. The truth, buried under years of Hollywood whispers and unspoken words, is now clawing its way to the surface. And trust me, once you hear it, you'll never see these two legends the same way again. Eastwood, now 94, sits by his living room window, lost in thought. The man who once ruled the Wild West, with nothing but a steely glare and a six-shooter, now finds himself staring into the past. But this isn't just nostalgia. It's something deeper, something unresolved. Hackman's name lingers in the silence, heavier than the weight of any Oscar. These men weren't just co-stars. They were warriors of an era that refused to bow. But what happened between them? Why did a friendship forged in the fires of Hollywood's toughest sets turn into years of estrangement? Their bond was solidified in 1992 with Unforgiven, a film that wasn't just about outlaws, it was about two aging gunslingers making peace with their own past. And yet, behind the scenes, tension crackled like gunpowder. They respected each other, but their silence spoke louder than words. Hackman, the relentless force who once electrified audiences as Popeye Doyle, simply vanished from Hollywood without a farewell. No dramatic exit, no retirement tour, just an eerie, unexplained absence. Clint called a few times, then stopped, because some men don't need to say goodbye, they just ride off into the sunset. But then came the letter, a single envelope, no return address, marked only with 3 trembling letters. G. H. Hackman's handwriting, aged but sharp, delivered a message that stopped Eastwood cold. One last ride, just you and me. No agents, no cameras, just us, and a story only we can tell. Eastwood read that letter over and over, the edges growing softer with time. But he never replied. Not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid. Afraid that seeing Hackman again would mean confronting a truth too raw to bear. They first crossed paths in the 70s. Clint was still shaking off the shadow of Dirty Harry, while Hackman had just won an Oscar for The French Connection. Their initial meeting was brief, almost forgettable. Clint, the quiet observer, whiskey in hand. Hackman, the loud victor, reveling in his moment. Two forces of nature on separate paths, but fate had other plans. Fast forward to Unforgiven, their defining moment. The scene where Hackman, as Little Bill, watches Clint's character ride away in the rain. That wasn't just acting, that was real. That was Hackman knowing they would never share the screen again. And Clint knew it too. After Unforgiven, their encounters dwindled. Calls turned into years of silence. But the letters, oh, the letters never stopped. Hackman wasn't one for emails, and Clint never took to texting. Their bond lived in ink, in scribbled words exchanged across decades. And buried in those letters were secrets, regrets, and one persistent question. Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we did one more? Then, in 2015, Hackman sent his boldest message yet. No cryptic hints, no veiled words, just a direct challenge. Let's tell our story before it's too late. Clint hesitated, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he knew the question itself was enough. They both understood. The shadow of Unforgiven loomed too large. Anything else would be a pale imitation. But Hackman wasn't done. In 2019, knowing his time was running out, he sent Clint one final gift. A leather-bound notebook with a single line inside. We had our ride, partner. That's all that matters. When the news of Hackman's passing spread, Clint didn't shed a tear. He simply opened that old notebook, sat on his porch, and whispered, "See you at the next town, partner." Because old cowboys don't say goodbye. They just ride away, leaving behind legends that never fade. But there's still one unanswered question. One final mystery that Eastwood has never spoken about. And it's a revelation that could change everything we thought we knew about these Hollywood icons. Stay tuned, because this story isn't over yet. The phone call ended, but neither of them hung up. Just silence, breaths mingling through the static like two cowboys at opposite ends of a deserted street, hands hovering over their holsters, but neither drawing. That was how it ended for Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman. Not with words, not with closure, just a long pause that stretched into eternity. Clint later told a close friend, "I don't think I'll talk to Gene again." And he was right. When the news of Hackman's passing surfaced in 2023, Clint Eastwood said nothing. No tribute, no public statement. Instead, he retreated to his ranch, opened an old drawer, and pulled out the letters. Letters from Gene, spanning decades, from their first collaborations to the last shaky words sent before the silence took over. He read them all, again and again, as if searching for something left unsaid, a hidden truth buried between crossed-out sentences and unsent notes. But there was no secret, no revelation, just a lingering void between two men who had been more than colleagues, more than friends, but never willing to admit it. When Gene and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were found in their Santa Fe home, it wasn't the news itself that rattled Clint. At 94, he was no stranger to loss. It was the finality, the realization that the last words that should have been spoken would never be said. The press swarmed, waiting for a response, but none came. 2 years of unspoken words, of bridges burned and stubborn silences had built a wall between them. But that afternoon, Clint broke his silence. Not through a press release, not through his manager. He stood before a local newspaper, voice hoarse from time and regret, and said simply, "There was no finer actor than Gene Hackman, and no friend more important to me than him." 2 sentences, no embellishment, no nostalgia-laced farewell. But for those who had followed their story, it was a declaration heavier than any eulogy. Clint had never said such things about anyone, not his mentors, not his closest co-stars, only for Gene. Then Clint disappeared. He cut off his phone, turned off the fax machine, and locked the doors of his ranch. Only one call was made, to Kyle Eastwood, his son. And Kyle, who had spent a lifetime watching his father's unspoken battles, heard something in Clint's voice that had never been there before. "We wasted too much time being stubborn old bastards," Clint admitted. Just one sentence, but in it, there was everything. The regret, the affection, the years of silent understanding that had bound 2 men who refused to speak what truly mattered. Gene Hackman wasn't just a co-star. He was the only mirror in which Clint Eastwood could see himself, stripped of the cowboy myth, the hardened image, the unyielding legend. And Clint was the same for Gene. For 50 years, they had done everything but say what needed to be said. And when the time came, the final bullet wasn't a gunshot. It was silence. Hollywood woke up to the loss like a sudden cold wind. Gene Hackman was gone, and with him, a piece of cinematic history that could never be replicated. Tributes poured in, some from those who knew him personally, others from actors who had only watched him from afar. Morgan Freeman posted a black-and-white photo from 1992. Clint, Gene, and himself sitting on a porch, cigarettes in hand, looking into the distance. The caption was simple: 2 legends, 1 story. And then, the world turned to Clint. What would he say? What would he do? When his response finally came, it wasn't in an interview or a televised tribute. It was a handwritten letter, sent quietly to the Hollywood Reporter. "Gene Hackman and I were never close friends. Not in the way people think. We didn't call each other. We didn't celebrate birthdays. We fought more than we laughed. But if you asked me at the other end of my gun who I'd want to see, it was always Gene." 4 sentences. That was it. But Hollywood, the industry built on spectacle, knew the weight of those words. This wasn't just a tribute. This was an admission, a final, unspoken truth between 2 men who had spent their lives pretending they had nothing to say to each other. Old photos resurfaced, from the set of Unforgiven, from late-night drinking sessions, from moments between takes where Clint and Gene stood in the rain, unsmiling, unposed, just existing side by side. Hollywood loves a perfect story, but this one had sharp edges, contradictions, unfinished sentences, and perhaps that's why it mattered more than any polished Hollywood friendship. January 2024, a cold winter in Carmel by the sea. Clint Eastwood sat at his old wooden table, a fountain pen in hand. Before him, a blank sheet of paper. And for the first time, he wrote the words he had never said. "Gene, I guess we both thought we had more time." Turns out, all we had was Unforgiven. Somewhere, in the fading twilight, maybe Gene Hackman still stood, squinting at an old friend across an invisible divide. No greetings, no gunshots.